קרתה לצערנו אמש תקלה טרגית. אנחנו חוקרים את המקרה, אנחנו נסיק את המסקנות.
That's the voice of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describing the recent military strike by the IDF on Rafah that killed 2 Hamas commanders as a tragic mishap because it also led to the deaths of about 45 Palestinian civilians who were sheltering in a nearby tent camp. For many people, especially Palestinians, this latest flashpoint in Israel's ongoing war against Hamas in Gaza sparked renewed international protests on the streets, including in our country, and brought condemnation from world leaders, including Canada's foreign minister. For Toronto health insurance executive Yafa Sakkejha, the incident likely made her angry and sad, but also even more convinced she's doing the right thing by volunteering on behalf of an Israeli peace organization called Standing Together. The group was co-founded by Jews and Palestinians living in Israel who are fed up with endless wars and with politicians on all sides who can't see that a different way must be found to build a safe and just society with a shared homeland in the region for both peoples. While Sakkejha doesn't consider herself a spokesperson for all Palestinians, especially because she lives here in Canada and is not in the war zone, she's working hard to build bridges of understanding with the Jewish community here by showing empathy and embracing our pain, all while carrying her own people's trauma.
It's more understanding that some people don't believe that Palestinians exist as a people. It's like these are Arabs, these are Muslims that conquered the land. There's no such thing as Palestine. Knowing that floats around and not knowing who is a safe person. When people ask me, where are you from? I'm like, Toronto. They're like, where are you really from? I'm like, the Middle East. And it's until I get cross-examined, then I'm like, fine, I'm Palestinian. What do you want to know? But I don't want to kill you and I don't hate you. It's a heavy bag to carry around with you.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Thursday, May 30th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News.
Is life really miserable for the Jews, or are we just glued to a 24-hour news cycle?
Should we be worried that so many young rabbis are coming out of seminary as anti-Zionists?
And what does Judaism say about polyamory?
If you want answers to these questions, well, we don't have any. But we do love asking them. Each week, tune into Bonjour Chai to hear debates and hot takes by me, Avi Feingold,
and me, Phoebe Maltz-Bovey,
as we sit down with pundits, rabbis, and scholars to talk about the most pressing issues facing Jews in Canada and around the world.
Listen and subscribe to Bonjour Chai at thecjn.ca/bonjour or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yafa Sakkejha still has family living in Ramallah and Jerusalem. Before Israel's War of Independence in 1948, her father's family owned property in Jaffa and ran orange groves. They fled as Palestinian refugees first to Egypt, then to Jordan. Eventually, her dad came to Canada. Her mother was raised in East Jerusalem. After the First Intifada in the 1980s, she came here, and the couple met. And like many immigrants, they struggled, but eventually they did well enough financially and sent Yafa and her sister to a private school in Toronto. Both went on to university, and after launching a wellness business in cottage country north of Toronto, Sakkejha went into the family firm, a health benefits company. On May 15th, as Palestinians call Nakba Day, which is their expulsion from their homes as a result of Israel's 1948 War of Independence, she often posts old photos of her ancestors' deeds to their land, their Palestine driving permits, and black and white snapshots of family members wearing suits and ties, confidently walking the streets of Jaffa, the city for whom she was named. Since October 7th, we've brought you the voices of Canadian Jews and Israelis sharing how the war has touched every aspect of their lives. But we also know there's another community living through similar kinds of anxiety and worry. On today's CJN Daily, Yafa Sakkejha joins us from her home in Etobicoke. And a note, our conversation began as I tried to make her comfortable coming onto a clearly pro-Israel Jewish show.
Well, I've been following the CJN on Instagram, so I see your headlines. I kind of get what you talk about, and I think it's a really important voice. And what I was asking Zach last week was just how can I help you? What is the outcome that you're hoping your readers get from our discussion?
I don't have an outcome in mind. I am leaving us to drive the bus together. and we'll see what happens.
Sure.
What do you want to get out of it?
I think for me, in talking to Jewish communities, my personal goal is to heal the Jewish pain. Does that make sense?
No.
It doesn't
That's
make
why we
sense.
should talk about it. We should start because you came to my notice through an initiative, Standing Together Omdim B'Yachad. Co-founders from Israel came and they did like a cross-Canada tour where they spoke. How did it come that you decided you wanted to be part of this initiative, the Standing Together?
I first discovered Standing Together in November 2023, so a month after the terrorist attacks of October 7th. And the terrorist attacks of October 7th had caused just such shame and embarrassment and depression in my heart as a mother with Palestinian ancestry, and I felt very lost. And in November, when I found this community and everything they were talking about, I read their mission statement on their website, and it just boils down to there's 14 million people living on the Holy Land. Well, maybe 15 million or 16 million by now because people are having babies, and no one is going anywhere. And we have to care about fighting for equal safety and security for both Israelis and Palestinians, equal freedom and human rights for both Palestinians and Israelis. And that to me felt like the only really organization that I could really get behind. Does that make sense, Ellen?
Well, it does. And I thank you for telling me that. You also donated $30 to Hillel, Ontario.
How did you know that?
Because that's what I do, which I found quite, I mean, you donate to both many causes, but
So
you
funny.
donated to Hillel.
Because a friend of mine who I went to school with sent me a link and asked me to donate. So I donated. It's funny, like my relationship with Hillel is so interesting. Like when I was at Queen's University in 2003, my first year, I was 17. My name Yafa really is both a Hebrew name and an Arabic name. So a lot of people were inviting me to Hillel. And I was like, oh my God, what is Hillel? I'll totally come. There's food. Cool. And they're like, oh, Hillel is this thing and thing and thing and thing. I was like, okay. And I'm like, oh, as this gentleman is talking, he's really cute. I'm like, when do I disappoint him? But I'm not Jewish. So,
well, it's just I guess many people would say, well, why would a Palestinian ancestry person donate to Hillel? They're advocating for, the safety and survival of Jewish kids on campus. So it was a nice thing, I guess, that I saw.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Nothing.
What's wrong with advocating for the safety of Jewish people on campus?
I was going to ask you about your name. Would you know whether your parents named you Yafa because of your beauty, or is there a heavier backstory to where they came from in pre-mandate Israel, Palestine?
Yes.
And how does that weigh on you?
Thank you.
When did you know this?
Immediately. Immediately. Like I joke that like they stamped my ancestral trauma on my forehead so that I never forget it. And I carry the guilt and burden around everywhere, but that's okay. Yeah. I mean, both of my grandparents used to live in Jaffa prior to 1948 May.
Who's still in that area for you? Who's still there and alive?
Yes. No one lives in Jaffa anymore, but I have family that live in Ramallah. I have family that live in East Jerusalem. And I have family that have the passport. I have family that don't have the passport. And then a lot of my family are diasporic, like lots of people in Jordan, people in Dubai, Toronto, Denmark, everywhere. But I mean, just to like bottom line it, I guess if you wanted to understand like really quickly what our 1948 story is, effectively in May 1948, both sets of my grandparents left Jaffa, and one set left preemptively because they heard there was fighting and violence happening in Haifa, and they thought, let's like leave because we have young women and we just want to get out of here. My father was born in Cairo, May 1948. And then my other grandparents were, trigger warning, like I don't want anyone to think that I harbor hatred because of what I'm about to say, but our eyewitness history is that we believe it was the Haganah. There were 55 armed militia that surrounded my grandparents' home on Jaffa on the waterfront and shot at them, and they escaped and fled. That said, I don't want to dismantle the state of Israel. And I don't want you to think that I'm conflating that trauma with a different narrative. Does that make sense?
I just think it was important for our listeners to know, because we all have backstories, many of us.
Yes.
Everyone has their story, but it's important for our listeners to know your ties to the same piece of land. You mentioned when you heard about October 7th, you felt shame. Let's unpack that a little bit. Why would you feel shame for something you had no personal involvement in?
Because it's a shameful event done in my name. It's deeply upsetting when somebody hijacks your identity that is so glued to who I am. You know, like the word Palestinian has so much meaning to me. And to see the news of what happened and the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th in the name of the Palestinian cause. I didn't do it, no, but I think I have a lot of guilt around, could I have done more in the last 10 years to be part of a solution?
You ask yourself, what could have I done?
I guess more of this. I could have done more of this.
How does being with Standing Together put you on a different path that you actually can do something?
Because I think for me to pick one side, it feels unnatural to me. And don't get me wrong, I have been in my history somebody who picked my side, like the Palestinian side. I think when you get swept in your echo chamber and you get swept in your community, and there's so much fear around everything and trauma, but standing together and reading their mission statement, it's the closest thing that I think is tangibly actionable. And I always prioritize tangible outcomes over intangible things you can't touch and feel. But do you know what I mean by that? Like our stories, our identity, our symbolism at this point in time, to me, takes a lower precedent over tangible real world outcomes that are going to help people that are alive in the Holy Land.
You call it the Holy Land. Is there a reason why?
I call it the Holy Land so I don't trigger anybody, because my heart wants to call it Palestine. But I understand from my Jewish friends that that can symbolize the erasure of Israel, the erasure of the Jewish people. However, as a Palestinian, if I only say the word Israel, Palestinians feel erasure. And right now, everyone's like spending so much time debating one state, two states, confederation, I don't know what. And I'm like, I want to use neutral language at this point in time, given that so many people are in pain.
Can we talk a bit about the practical things that you can put your hands on? I know, for example, your sister, Zahra, has been wearing a purple T-shirt and going down to the UCLA encampments and standing there and being interviewed, and people don't quite know what to make of them because they're asking, stop now, stop violence. I mean, she's doing the work, I suppose, that you are too. But I mean, what does it look like for you? She's doing that. What are you doing?
I'm just, again, I want to support people that live in the society over there as much as possible. I don't live there. I cannot, from a Western point of privilege with my Canadian passport, tell people what to do or what to think. But I care about the land. I care about the place. And so I want to amplify the voices of people who are working really hard.
When you were talking about pain, I want to ask you about your own personal experiences here in Canada. You were born here to Palestinian parents. What was it like for you growing up? I mean, you went to Bayview Glen and you went to university and you had like all these. What experience did you have, if any, in anti-Palestinian or anti-Muslim racism?
Number one, thank you for this question. Because while I appreciate, and I don't know, I'm assuming that you might be living with pain, that you can expand your heart to empathize with my pain, even though I represent the enemy, shows how deep the ethics is. So thank you, Ellen, for that question, number one. Number two, it's like a cloud that follows you everywhere. When you know what's happening and you feel like you don't know how you can ever be part of ending the issues. So I think growing up, we didn't grow up wealthy. We grew up very humble. I was born in Moss Park. My parents are refugees. Like they didn't have a lot of money when they came here. But yes, through hard work, we tried really hard to, further our education and be as helpful as possible to Canadians. And therefore we succeeded. But I think growing up, knowing that you're Palestinian, it's almost like this, but also not being able to show my identity publicly because of fear that my identity will just automatically trigger somebody and therefore elicits a cascade of responses. Does that make sense? So like I never publicly show that I'm Palestinian. This is the only time I am, because I feel like we have to glue this identity to this voice together in order to be effective. But I think growing up, it's tough to be public about your identity.
Well, were you, I guess, harassed or belittled or prevented from getting a job or
No. It's more understanding that some people don't believe that Palestinians exist as a people. Like it's like these are Arabs, these are Muslims that conquered the land. Like there's no such thing as Palestine. Like it's like that narrative that doesn't represent all people, by the way. I think it's maybe a different minority.
You have written about identifying yourself as a Palestinian. And I was curious about somebody you wrote a Instagram post about, that someone was very dear to you who was hostage that was released. Was that person also Palestinian, or was that Israeli, or?
No, they're mixed. I'm related
it's not a
to
foreign,
them. I'm related to them. I'm related to them. It's somebody in my family.
Okay.
I mean, what I can say about this is that immediately, like October 8th, I discovered that this person who's very dear to our family was taken hostage. So it immediately became a nightmare from so many different angles, and primarily because I'm a mother and I have children, and I thought about that person's mother and the nightmares that person might be having. And thank God they're alive. We can't say that for many other hostages. I mean, the baby Kafir, who would do that? Why would you take someone's baby?
When you talk about this, what do people in, let's say, very hardline pro-Palestinian circles say to you? Do you get negative comments? Do you get you're a traitor? How do you navigate that?
Ellen, all of my Palestinian friends and family support what I have been saying quietly. They're not public with social media. They're busy working. They're busy at their desk job. They're busy trying to get their kids to school on time. But I've had a lot of messages offline, and so many people offline, real live Palestinians and a lot of people that live in Palestine, in Israel, saying, we appreciate what you're saying. People who have attacked me viciously, ironically, Ellen, are not Palestinian. But people have attacked
Not surprising.
me. They have sent me hate mail and sent me but I don't care. Who cares?
It seems as though, from a Jewish perspective, because that's who I interview most of the time, people in the encampments and in the protests, they don't want dialogue. They just want to have slogans and signs and yelling and vandalism. And it makes Jewish people even more afraid or angry. Do you understand? And can you help us understand how that happens? Yeah.
I know why. And I'm not sure if your listeners really want to know why. It's going to be upsetting. Early on after October 7th, I heard one of my Jewish friends saying, when we can't even agree on the fundamentals, it's like, how can we even move forward? And I feel like that's a mirror statement, right? Like after October 7th, there's a lot of denial in the quote unquote pro-Palestinian camp of the rape that happened of Israeli women, which I don't deny. There's a lot of denial of how many people were actually killed. There was a lot of like questioning of stuff that came out of Israel. And these people were soldiers? Like, who cares? Like, no, that's wrong. We should accept and listen to people. And I will say, Ellen, it's a mirror image. I don't speak for the Jewish community, but I see a lot of debate as to, well, if Palestinians are saying X, and debate, like an intellectual debate, as opposed to like honoring the lived experience. And, we have to put all of our cards on the table here because life is on the line. We have to be honest with each other.
I, as a reporter and an interviewer, I hear people saying, I can't talk to people who are saying from the river to the sea because it means they want to get rid of me. What does that mean to you, and why do you think it upsets people so much? And how do the people who are saying it feel about it? Do they understand how the words fall on the other side versus what they're meaning by saying it?
It's funny because my Palestinian family and I, we don't use this phrase normally when I have in my life heard it, before I understood how it terrifies Jews, when my ears would hear it, my ears would think, oh, we want equal human rights across the land. At the same time, in talking to my Jewish friends, they say, well, no, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free means free from Jews. I thought, oh, okay. So then it was in November 2023 that I heard one of my Jewish friends say, this is how it feels to me. And then it was the first time that I really was able to put myself in someone else's shoes.
Do you feel personally that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide? What would you like our listeners to understand about that word?
Can I ask you for your opinion on what you think?
You can. I haven't ever actually articulated it before, and I don't usually get into debates because I'm here to hear what you have to say. So how about you go first?
If you want to dig deep at the bottom of my heart, you will find something there. And what you will find is that, I ask the listeners, if you and your lived experience in your family had a word for what happened to your people that you don't dare put on a diary for fear that somebody will find it. And somebody came and denied that word. And they said, is it really that? Let's intellectualize that. Was it really the intent? How does that make you feel, Ellen?
Yeah. I don't take positions publicly because then I can't talk to any.
No, I understand. Yes. And again, everyone has a different role in furthering human rights.
Right. I mean, if I interviewed Sinwar, then I'd have certainly a lot of other things I would say.
I would like to go and visit Sinwar. I would like to go and visit him and talk to him. I really would.
What would you ask him?
I would just like to tell him in my own language that it's time to put the suitcase down. Our people are a people, also men, right? Older men in my culture. Like there's a lot of, I'm sorry to say this is going to sound really upsetting because he's a war criminal. He's a thug. I don't like him. I don't want him to lead my people. But how do we disarm a male figurehead like that in a society like that? We have to come with first acknowledging his side. Because really, again, at the end of the day, I don't care about intangible stuff that doesn't matter. I care about tangibly, how do we end the killing? And with that comes having to have dialogue with somebody and hearing them. I know it sounds very uncomfortable for this, but, somebody might put a mirror to Netanyahu and say, well, how would you go and speak to Netanyahu? And do you provide respect to the leader of a people? Do you provide the ability to hear his story and the fact that his brother was killed by a terrorist attack? And do we care to end this, or do we care to just fight on the internet with intellectual things that we can't touch or feel? I want to share a story with you. I went to this Indigenomics conference, November 2023. It's hard for me to get out of bed in November 2023, but I dragged myself there because it was important. I think people say, why are you here? Are you here for your business? I'm like, no, I'm here as a person. They're like, what do you mean you're here as a person? I'm like, well, I am sorry for the slow genocide that Canada has committed and continues to commit for First Nations communities. And in me using the words that I hear that community say, it validated how they feel. And the reaction, when you use someone's own words to describe what happened to them. I didn't live here during the 1800s. I wasn't here when they signed the treaties. My parents came here in 1970, 1980. So at the same time, I think there is something healing to a person about acknowledging, hey, Ellen, this is your eyewitness history. I acknowledge that. And imagine, I ask people to think, how would it feel if we debated that instead of acknowledging it?
Can I ask you just briefly before we end, what do you make of the encampments on the university campuses? Have you visited any of them at all? Or
I have not. I have a toddler and a 5-year-old, and it's very busy. I also live in the suburbs. So to be honest, I have decided to advance my people's human rights in a different method. What do I make of the encampments? I think, my heart wants to hold many things true at the same time. So I absolutely abhor when I hear the worst, most disgusting anti-Semitic slurs coming from encampments. And some of the video that we saw and the destruction of property is really not additive to the movement, and it's wrong. At the same time, I think people are in pain. They're in pain, and they're watching the videos of what's happening in Gaza. And I think once you watch the videos of what's happening in Gaza, you will be able to empathize with the painful hearts of the encampment. If you have hid from those videos, I don't blame you. Those are very difficult things to watch. And I don't peer pressure anybody. I think everybody needs to get involved in a way that feels authentic to them.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you want to ask me, or what message our Jewish listeners should understand? Because I think there are some people who will be hearing this podcast and they'll say, oh my God, she interviewed a Palestinian. I'm not listening to that. I'm not going to even bother to listen.
And I understand.
Which defeats the purpose, right? So
I understand. And we have, like, people are in pain, and we have to meet people where they are. And my job is not to force people to engage in any triggering content. No. I mean, I think the only thing I'd like to say is, like, we all have a privilege, which is the privilege of our identity. And if you've been listening to this and you've I have made you feel a certain thing because of my identity, think what is it about your identity that could also be additive to helping achieve equal human rights, equal safety and security for all humans living in Israel and in Palestine.
I know that our listeners won't know, but I do have both the Canadian and Israeli flag behind me. I hope that was okay. I thought about taking the Israeli flag off before I talked to you, which is it's very telling, but I left it. I thought we could handle it. I mean, we talk about what's going on in Israel with the Canadian podcast about Jewish stuff. Right now, it's all about Israel. But I just wanted to explain to you why I left it there.
No, listen, I understand. And if you come to my house, Ellen, which I hope you do, you can come and I'll make you a tea, and I'll make you
pleasure.
Focaccia and za'atar and olive oil, and we can.
I'll make you za'atar. I have za'atar too.
But you might see like a map that says visit Palestine, and I might say the same thing to you, which is I hope I don't trigger you. This is just something that's very meaningful to my heart. And I respect that you have symbols in your office that are meaningful to your heart.
I know your sister's been, quote, back home, quote unquote, to visit relatives. I guess you have too over the years. Your family's taken you back to your
Yeah, we used to go every few years. When was the last time? I think before COVID. The little one is tough on planes right now. I think once he's able to take a plane, I would love to go and visit.
That's true for every family, but is there anything more that you're worried about? Because your sister said she was like grilled but an inch of her life.
Oh yes, that's normal. Sorry, yes, that when I say no, like I am like we have to book a full day on the way in and the way out to be interrogated, but that would not prevent me from wanting to come and drink freshly squeezed pomegranate juice that was squeezed in Jerusalem, and like that warm bread with the sesames and that ice cream, you know what I mean? Smelling the salty air. Nothing is going to stop me from wanting to visit. At the same time, I'm not going to go and claim our house back. Like our house, my grandparents' house is now an elderly home for Israeli elders. We go, we look, we take pictures, and we go home. We're not going to kick them out. Like, let them have the house. It's a beautiful house.
Have you been in to tell them I used to live here? Or you
No, we don't want to cause problems. We just want to go and like touch it and go home.
I can't tell you how moving it's been to talk to you.
It's a privilege that you ask me these questions. It's a gift. It's a gift of healing to my heart. Ellen, thank you.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. I'm sure you'll have some comments or questions about the episode, and we welcome them. Or if you want to get in touch with Yafa, please write to me at ebessner@thecjn.ca. To learn more about Standing Together or about Yafa herself, go to the links in our show notes. The CJN Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our theme music was composed by Dov Beck-Levine. We'll be back next week. Thanks for listening to the CJN Daily.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Sack! Hyman!
Redmond, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest-running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.